Hello again, my lovely people. I feel that today you're ready for a challenge. In this video, we will discuss some idiomatic passive voice constructions. If you feel you're not ready for a challenge just yet, go back to my previous video about the basic rules of the passive because things might get complicated today. In my previous video about the passive, we have covered the difference between active and passive voice and how to transform an active sentence into a past equivalent. Let's list those basic rules again. Firstly, your object of your active sentence becomes the new subject of your passive sentence. Secondly, your active subject is transformed into an agent using the preposition by. And finally, also your verb form is transformed using the auxiliary to be. If you feel that you don't master these basic rules yet, rewatch the previous video and come back to this one when you're ready. The thing is that in English, you also have something called idiomatic passive voice structures. These are special types of passive sentences that do not seem to follow the basic rules that we have already covered. They are fixed constructions, and they can be used for certain sentences, but not all of them. And we will discuss two of these structures in this video. Let's have a look at the first structure, which is a pretty easy one. The sentence, they estimate that $200 have been spent, is partly an active sentence at the beginning. We can transform this into a passive in a way that we haven't done before, resulting in it is estimated that $200 have been spent. What we have done here is that we have used it as our new subject, followed by the verb estimate again, but this time in the passive voice. Note, however, that you keep using the same tense. Estimate is present simple and is estimated is present simple as well, just in the passive voice. Complete the rest of the sentence repeating the subclause starting with that again, and then you have your actual result. Pretty straightforward structure, am I right? You can, however, not use it for every single sentence, but only for sentences with verbs such as to estimate, to decide, to expect, to hope, to believe, etc. The second idiomatic structure is a little bit more challenging, but once you get to know it, you will get the hang of it. The sentence, people believe that John is a liar, is an active sentence. And a lot of people probably don't see how you can transform this into a good passive one, but there is an option. Namely, John is believed to be a liar. Same for, they say that his brother has uncovered the plot, which can be turned into his brother is said to have uncovered the plot. This is a new way of turning a sentence into a passive one, and this is also something that you don't really have in Dutch, so that is why it might sound strange at first, but these sentences are grammatically correct, so they're not wrong or anything like that. If you look a little bit closer, your new passive sentences all have the same structure. You first use a new subject, and this is always the subject of your subclause starting with that. Then you put the verb such as to believe or to say into a passive form, but keeping the same tense. And this construction is then completed with a to infinitive of the verb that you have used in your subclause. Again, you can't do this with all sentences, but only with verbs such as to believe, to say, to suppose, to report, stuff like that. However, let's have another look at the passive sentences that we have just created. In the first one, we have to be as an infinitive, and in the second one, to have uncovered. To be is like the regular infinitive that we've always been using for the past few years, and the correct term for this infinitive is actually the present infinitive. Now, the infinitive that we've used in the second sentence looks a little bit different. Since we have used have and a past participle, this is what we call the perfect infinitive. So apparently, different sentences call for different infinitives, so which one do you need to use for your sentences? Well, to do that and to figure out which infinitive to use, you have to ask yourself two questions. Namely, is the activity in my subclause present, future, or past? And present and future belong together. And secondly, is it active or passive? And if you can answer these two questions, then you're always going to figure out which infinitive to use. So, to then figure out which infinitive, you can use the following scheme that you see around the screen and that you also have in your syllabus. Always create the scheme on a draft while you're doing your test or exam. It's going to make it a lot easier to do the exercises. With each infinitive, by the way, I've made an example with the verb to take so that you know how to actually form it. Now, if you are dealing with a present or future activity in your subclause, you always look at the first row of the table. If it is past, you need to use the last or the second row. Then, when you're talking about active or passive, you need to actually look at the columns. So if it is an active action, you look at the first column of the table, while if it is passive, you need to use an infinitive from the last row. So you always need to look at the rows, look at the columns, and see at which infinitive you actually arrive. And that is then the one that you need to use. Let's explain this with an example. As an active sentence, you, for example, get, people think that George will win the next race. And I'm going to ask you, okay, transform this into a good passive alternative. You first look for a new subject, which is always the subject of the subclause starting with that. So in this case, that is George. Then you need to transform think into a good passive alternative, keeping the same tense. So as a result, you get George is thought. As a last step, we need to figure out which infinitive to use. So we need to ask ourselves two questions. Firstly, is the action in the subclause present, future, or past? Well, we have will win, so actually that is a future. Secondly, our action in the subclause is an active because you say George will win the next race. George is the one doing the winning, so we're dealing with an active sentence over here. So let's have a look at our scheme then and use it in the correct way. So it is active, so we need to look at the column with the title active, okay? And since we're dealing with a future action, we need to look at the first row, and then eventually we arrive at the present infinitive, which is to take, or like to dance, or to eat, or whatever. So apparently we just need to use our classic present infinitive. So what is our end result then going to be? Well, George is thought to win the next race. So we figured out which infinitive to use. In this case, that is just a regular present infinitive. However, that is not always the case. Let's look at another example. For example, people thought that the race was won by George's team. Okay, first look for your new subject, which is in this case the race, and then transform the verb thought into its passive equivalent. Then you get the race was thought, making sure that you keep the same tense. Okay, now we need to figure out which infinitive to use. The action in your subclause is actually in the past because we have was won, and it is also a passive construction because the race is not the one doing the winning, but it is George's team. So if we now use our scheme again, we're actually, when it comes to the rows, so horizontally, in the last one because we're dealing with an activity in the past. When we're looking at the columns, however, we're dealing with a passive one, so eventually we end up in the box that says passive perfect infinitive. And the example that I've given with to use is to have been taken, so we need to form it in that way. So, knowing that we need to use a passive perfect infinitive, the end result of our sentence will be, the race was thought to have been won by George's team. So you can see here that we have used a passive perfect infinitive. Now, in the rest of your syllabus, you will find some mixed exercises on both the basic rules and also these two idiomatic structures. In these sentences, I've already underlined the new subject, and you need to figure out if you are dealing with a basic sentence that just follows the basic rules, or if you can create an idiomatic structure with it. Finally, just follow all the steps for the different types and transform your sentence into a good passive alternative. Now we have covered everything that you need to know about the passive, and I'm going to give you one big tip. You need to prepare lots of exercises on this. You will eventually get the hang of it and you will recognize these idiomatic structures and you will recognize the basic rules, and it will become easier and easier. I promise, as long as you just practice a lot. So I would say good luck and try to do your best when it comes to the exercises. Bye!